All right. Hi guys. So in the previous few videos, we discussed a lot about designing your process from breaking down your product to its component parts, identifying the raw materials that you will be using, identifying the machines that you will be needing, and the processes that you will be needing to transform these raw materials into the final outputs. So that's the main topic of of the videos previously. So now it's all about discussing. Okay, so I have my process designed. Ngayon, the question is, how big should my process be? What is the scale and the magnitude of that process? Meaning, how much should it be able to produce? How fast should it be able to produce the specific product that I'll be needing in order for us to meet the necessary demand? Okay, so let me just share my screen. Let's go to the capacity planning module. Okay, so just a few quick definitions. So capacity planning. Let's start with capacity. So what is capacity? A basic definition of this is that capacity is the number of units a facility can hold, receive, store, or produce in any given time. So in the context of a process, capacity pertains to the amount that a process can produce given a certain period of time. Okay, so capacity decisions often determine capital requirements. Therefore, a large portion of fixed cost. Uh, there, yes. So capacity also determines whether demand will be satisfied or whether facilities will be idle. So let's kind of break this down a little bit. So capacity decisions often determine capital requirements. So what this means is that in order for you ultimately to increase the capacity of your process or to increase the number of units your process can produce at any given in a specified amount of time, what you need to do usually is you have to increase maybe the size of your warehouse, increase the number of machines that you're using, hire more people to uh, do more for your process, etc., etc. So because of this, a huge portion of your fixed cost, so your machines, your equipment, your office, your warehouse, etc., are actually tied to your capacity planning decisions. So yeah. Okay, so capacity planning is all about managing the capacity or the amount of output produced by the process of the company that produces the goods that it sells. Therefore, capacity is one of the metrics that allows you to measure the performance of the process. All right. Yeah, that's basically it. So I don't think I was able to mention in the previous videos regarding process design. So I know we focused a lot on the operations or actually creating the product from raw material to final output. But something that I want to kind of drill down is that process design is not limited to this, and that you actually use process design for a lot of different factors. So there's process design in HR, there's process design in procurement, there's process design in finance, uh, strategy, even business intelligence. All these things have their own processes and therefore can be designed. Therefore, they also have their own capacity, their own outputs, and yeah. So I just wanted to kind of drill down on that specific point. Okay, let's go to the PowerPoint for capacity planning. All right, so capacity planning. So what is it for? So from your market sizing and your forecasting exercise, you know how much you have to produce at any given period of time. So capacity planning is about ensuring that your production or your operations is actually able to fulfill that specific demand. So yeah, so capacity planning is definitely not limited just to operations. I said this also includes your distribution, your order taking, a lot of different processes actually. So it's very important to take that into consideration. Sorry. All right. So capacity is in essence a measurement. It's a measurement of the output that your process can produce. All right. So parang going a level deeper, there are a few ways you can define this capacity. A few ways you can define that specific output in which the process can make. So we have three definitions. So the first is the design capacity. So this is the maximum theoretical output of a system in a given period under ideal conditions. So imagine you have a machine and it can do 500, it can create 500 keychains per hour. Pero you also have assembly, you also have a lot of these different processes and bottlenecks. So what design capacity actually captures is what the output would be considering parang taking in your bottleneck, which we will discuss later on. Uh, yeah. So parang just taking what that bottleneck is, basically yun yung capacity mo eh. So parang under perfect conditions, everybody's working like a robot, working like a machine, like a well-oiled machine. That's design capacity. Next, for effective capacity, so it's a capacity a firm expects to achieve given the current operating constraints. So a few examples of these constraints are breaks, idle time, ano ba ba? Maintenance for the machines, maybe quality checking, etc., etc. So effective capacity is more often than not lower than design capacity. And then for the last type of capacity, we have the actual output. So this is the difference between the effective capacity and the lost output during unplanned resource idleness. So this is more of yung mga, this takes into consideration a lot of the things that you can't really plan out for. So absenteeism, maybe storms, weather interruptions, electrical surges or whatever. So the actual output is what the process actually produced in that specific period of time. So yeah, so design capacity and effective capacity, these two types of capacity are very much theoretical in the sense, they're conceptual, but the actual output is what's actually produced. So you kind of use design capacity and effective capacity to give you a sort of a benchmark on how your process is doing or how your process is performing. Okay. So measuring capacity performance. So what I've said, parang what I've mentioned just a while ago is that design capacity and effective capacity are benchmarks. So since they are standards in which we want to kind of try to achieve, we use a little bit of math to kind of measure how far or how near we are from that standard or from that ideal condition. So utilization is the ratio of actual output and design capacity. So basically, how far am I from my design capacity? That's what utilization is. How much am I utilizing this process? Kasi the capability of this process is 100 and I'm only utilizing maybe 80% of it, then my utilization would be like 80%. So efficiency naman is a proportion of actual output and effective capacity. So it's basically the same, except instead of using design capacity, you're very much using effective capacity. So yeah, and here are the formula for getting utilization and efficiency. So it's very, very straightforward. What's important here is really getting the essence of it and what it means. So it's more of measuring how well my performance is doing, how well the performance of the process is doing. So why are these measurements important? So in order to improve anything, you first need to measure it. Kasi if once you have a measurement, if you're able to move that specific measurement in the right direction, then you know objectively that you are actually improving your processor. Or if you were not able to actually improve it. So yeah, so utilization, this is the formula. Efficiency, this is the formula as well. All right, so capacity, let's tackle a few examples for capacity planning. Para it's a little bit more understandable. Okay, so capacity measure example. So a firm has a design capacity of 120 units per day, but after looking at their historical data, it was noted that the firm was only able to produce 80 units per day on average due to a problem with absenteeism and tardiness. The firm also performed a time and motion study under ideal conditions and found that they were able to produce 110 units. So obviously design capacity is 120 units. Okay, so let's just use the same sheet from before. So we have capacity planning. Okay. So design capacity, one given. Design capacity. We also have effective capacity, and then actual output. Usually these will be the variables that you will be looking out for when you're answering capacity planning problems. Oops. Okay. Yeah. So design capacity is 120 units. Effective capacity is, okay, so medyo may tricky siya dito eh. Okay, let's first identify what this AD is. So, but after looking at their historical data, it was noted that the firm was only able to produce 8 units per day. So it was already able to produce it, meaning that was the actual output. So actual output is 80. Okay, and then blah blah blah. The firm also performed a time and motion study under ideal conditions. So very important to take note, under ideal conditions, and found that they were able to produce 110 units. So that means your effective capacity is 110 units. All right, let's solve for what we're trying to look for. So what is the firm's utilization? So using this formula, utilization is actual output over design capacity. Actual output over design capacity. So that's 80 divided by 120. Let me just calculate that real quick. That's 0.667. And then you have, sorry, this is utilization. Utilization. So it's utilization. Next is effective capacity. Oh, effective capacity. So that's obviously already here. So that's 110 units. Next we have efficiency. So efficiency. So efficiency. Oops. The formula for that is actual output over effective capacity. So actual output. Oops. Actual output 80. Effective capacity 110. That gives us 0.7272. So 0.73 na lang, or roughly. Okay, so yeah, basically these are the answers for these two. All right, so some special considerations for good capacity planning is that, number one, your forecast has to be, sorry, your demand has to be forecasted accurately. This is because you take it as truth, and that's why you're planning for that amount. So pag sinabi mong the forecast is 100, that means you will have to produce 100. So, syempre, if you need to produce 100, you'll maybe stock up on an inventory, maybe you'll add more machines, get more people. So, syempre, there's already that cost that you will be incurring. So, if your forecast turns out to be way, way off, then capacity planning becomes a little bit more difficult. Okay, so next is understand the technology and capacity increments. So, this is basically, this means that when you're improving that process with capacity, with technology, or maybe adding more machines, you have to know how much more capacity will it add to your process. Next is find the optimum operating size, volume, or the amount of outputs your process can produce, economy and diseconomy of scales. So one of the things that I hope you guys learned from economics is a thing called economies and diseconomies of scale. So this is very much dependent on volume. So let's take fixed cost, for example. The higher your volume, the lower your fixed cost is on a per unit basis. So that happens because you're spreading out your cost to a lot more items. So yeah. So identifying the optimum size will allow you to kind of maximize that economies of scale. So sometimes you have to kind of match the capacity with the demand in order to get the most out of economies of scale. And the fourth factor is that build for change. So one of the things na we know for sure is that we can't really predict demand that accurately. So yes, historical data allows us to kind of reduce that uncertainty. Pero end of the day, hindi mo pa rin talaga masasabi at with 100% accuracy. So you have to build your process in such a way that it can change rather quickly. So yun. Okay, so capacity and demand problems. So sabihin natin, you're faced with the situation that your demand is way more than your capacity, way more than the process can produce. So what are the things that you can do? So number one is curtail demand by raising prices. So we know from the law of supply and demand, if we increase price, demand is going to tawag dito, decrease. Of course, there are a few exceptions, but this is not an economics class, so I won't be going into detail with them. All right, next is scheduling longer lead times. So if we are able to schedule longer lead times, then we can produce more output, more products, and so because there's more time. Next is long-term solution, of course, is to increase capacity. What this means is basically investing in equipment, more machines, maybe a bigger warehouse. Yun. Next type of problem is capacity exceeds demand. So you're producing way more than what is actually needed. So one thing you can do is stimulate the market. So what this means is promotions. Maybe get an influencer to shout out your brand or whatever. Lower prices. Lower your prices also works actually. But basically promotions is also lowering your prices. So stimulating the market, a lot of ways to do that. Next is product changes. So you can improve or tweak your product, maybe innovate in such a way so that more people will actually be willing to buy it, and thus kind of balancing capacity and demand. All right. So next is adjusting to seasonal demands. So what this means is that yung problema kasi is um, demand can change really quickly, a lot more quickly than you can change your capacity. So seasonality is an example of this. So minsan sa December, so para if you know na malakas ka sa December, does that mean you should hire or you should have like sobrang daming machines to fulfill that December demand? Kasi minsan it doesn't make sense. The cost does not make sense that kind of fulfill that demand. So you have to balance it out by having an average or making a lot of different parang strategies, which we'll actually be discussing later on. Next, so what you can do is produce products with complementary demand patterns. So an example of this, maybe if you're a clothing manufacturer, you can produce swimwear during the summer, and then you can use the same machines to produce jackets and winter wear in like the colder seasons. Yun. Okay, so a few of the different avenues which you can do to match capacity and demand. So some were actually already mentioned here. Okay, sorry, not here. Here. These are other ways you can do that. So making staffing changes will allow you to either increase or decrease your capacity, adjusting the number of available equipment. So by turning them off, you're basically not using them, so you don't have that variable cost of electricity, maintenance, etc. Improving processes to increase the total output. Basically, you improve processes by eliminating a lot of waste, eliminating a lot of redundancies, which is an example of a waste. Next is redesign the products to make it a lot more simple, a lot more. You can redesign products so that you can produce more using the same inputs, or you can redesign the product in such a way that more people would actually be willing to buy it. Next is adding process flexibility to better meet changing product preferences. So that means process flexibility is that you're able to actually change the product features relatively quickly. So we'll discuss more of this later on. Next is closing facilities. Obviously, if you close a facility, you decrease your capacity. You're basically turning off the whole facility. Okay. So yeah, I'll stop here for now. I don't want the video to become too long. So yeah. Okay.